The growth of the private security sector has seen an aggressive spike over the last 20 years, congruent to the rise in crime in South Africa. The private securitization of business centers, government buildings and neighbourhoods, especially urban and suburban neighbourhoods, has brought into stark contrast the disparity of who lives secured from the dangers and those who live unsecured from the tyranny of unrelenting crime. Further questions are being raised about whether the sharp growth of the private security sector is a good thing or a bad thing to begin with. To deconstruct this further with me is Safety and Security Analyst Willem Els. But before we go to Willem, let's give you some context about the size of the private security sector in South Africa. I want to take your attention to this graphic over here, which gives us a representation and a breakdown of private security in South Africa, the total number of boots on the ground of private security versus police officers and military boots in the country. As you can see, there are 2.8 million registered private security personnel in South Africa. We only have 188,000 active police officers and 71,235 military boots on the ground in South Africa, with a further 29,000 reservists sitting at home. But even if you combine all those numbers, it doesn't come close to the sheer number of registered private security guards in South Africa. And if you look at the second graphic, which I think gives us a indication of what the sector looks like, we have 577,444 members who are active security guards of those over 2 million who have been registered. Willem, I want to bring you into the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate it. Perhaps to start the conversation here, the privatization of security in South Africa raises the question if this is a good or a bad thing. The state typically has the monopoly over violence, but here it seems no longer to be the case. Does it serve democracy well?
Good evening to you. Yes, you know what, private security in South Africa is actually highly important due to several factors. And one of them that you already mentioned is that the tremendous spike in crime in South Africa. The sheer numbers of crime in South Africa is just so alarming, and it's overwhelming the police. That brings us to the limited police resources and also capacity that actually warrants for the private security sector. And then also what was mentioned by one of your previous commentators was, of course, your public-private partnerships with the police. We saw in the minister's speech when he laid out his strategy, one of the 5 areas that he actually highlighted was the partnerships between the police and the private sector, the police and NGOs, the police and religious organizations, etc., etc. Because remember, the police is within the community, and they are from the community. So that makes them very important. But we allowed the situation in South Africa to deteriorate to such an extent that the police really don't have the capacity to actually combat crime and investigate the crime that they need to.
Now, CIRA, the Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, is the designated regulatory authority with a very specific statutory framework through which they regulate the sector. But is it sufficiently regulated? How big of a risk do we have in South Africa when we move from private security to private militia? I think what happened in Phoenix is a tip of the iceberg of what could potentially happen when private security go rogue. But one then has to ask, how thick a line is there between private security turning into private militia?
You always have that possibility, and that is all when it comes to oversight. Now, you mentioned CIRA. They've got a very, very important job. They have to regulate, they have to inspect, and they have to do their job. That's the long and the short about it. It places a tremendous burden on them, and we need to see that they're capacitated in order to do so. Because at the end of the day, you know, the police have got IPIT to counter them. So whenever policeman misconduct is there, the IPIT have to investigate. So that is your counter and your balances that is brought into your policing sector. But we see that with the private security sector, we don't have that, and that is only the police that can then investigate them. So that actually bring a challenge to us, because now their partners, we heard about the partnerships and how important they are. They also have to investigate them when they are doing misconduct. So what happens now is that to a great extent, your security sector have to apply self-regulation in terms of conduct and their code of conduct that they do. And that is not where we need to be. You know, I think maybe it is time for South Africa to revisit their legislation and also their policies on this, and then to see how we can effectively provide the oversight measures that will not only be conducive for the security situation and for the industry, but also put in place those checks and balances.
Yeah, I want to bring your attention to this third graphic, which gives us an indication or a look into the spread of security personnel and security companies across the country, giving us an overview of which of our provinces is most problematic. If you look there at Gauteng, which is, of course, has some of the highest crime rates in the country, there are over 1 million private security guards actively in Gauteng, with the second biggest province being KwaZulu-Natal, with 536,000, nearly 537,000 private security there. The Western Cape, which is the second biggest economic hub in the country, seems to be lagging far behind the KwaZulu-Natal province as well as Gauteng. In fact, it is congruent to Limpopo. Does it surprise you at all, Willem, that the Western Cape, which has the highest rate of drug trafficking as a crime statistic in the country, would have such little private security guards, where there's such a high concentration in Gauteng and in KwaZulu-Natal?
Yeah, you know, in the first place, it's supply and demand and what the people are prepared to pay for, because as one of your commentators also mentioned, you know, they don't receive any funding from the state or anywhere else. So it's their subscribers that actually pay the salaries and pay for their capacity, even though they reach out and they extend. So Gauteng, of course, because of the crime rates, Gauteng is number one because of the sheer population and everything else. But also we must remember that a lot of your insurance requirements also require that you have security, whether it's with your vehicle or other security that can respond in the situations. So that also places an extra burden, but also an opportunity for your private security companies to expand. So that is your challenge, but also you must remember that the investigation of crime it lies with the police. The police cannot abscond from their responsibility in the Constitution. So that is why. For the police now to say, right, we have the partnerships, we are benefiting, we're using technology, we're combining our strengths, they are force multipliers, etc., etc. They do not investigate the crime, and the police will have to capacitate and take ownership of the responsibility in partnership with the private sector, but they must take more responsibility. Yeah,
look, it's really only the middle class and the well-off that can afford private security, and it's really the rich, the uber rich, that can afford bodyguards. We've also seen a spike in that over the last couple of years. It means that the vast majority of South Africans can't afford private security. With a tax base of only about approximately 8 million South Africans, it means there are 52 million South Africans who rely on the police, who do not have private security, and who perhaps have to set up things like community forums. That once again shows the class divide in South Africa. Is that to be worried about?
Of course it is to be worried about, but you know, we see how resilient South Africa is. South Africans come together and they form these community forums, and like we refer to that as community innovations that are being formed in order to safeguard themselves, and then they want to take hands with the police. We must also remember that the police have got this sector policing model that they're applying. It's not implemented everywhere as it should be, and that is the opportunity for these private community forums to take hands with the police in the community policing forums and become involved. Remember, at the end of the day, the police cannot combat crime alone. Those criminals live amongst us, and we have to find a way to restore the trust of the public in the police, so that the public can come forward with information to the police in order to solve crime.
Yeah, surely with the tyranny of crime on the rise, that this problem won't go away anytime soon. We'll still see an increase in demand for private security. Willem, thank you so much for your time. Really do appreciate it. That is Willem Els, who is a security expert. We'll bring you more coverage on this throughout the show, but also on various other SABC News programs. We continue the conversation on the other side of the short break.